Okay, guys, so thank you so much for joining in today's session. And I'll just firstly quickly introduce myself. Now, I'm Sharos Bhatt, and I'm part of the admissions team here at Masters Union. And I think a lot of you may already know about the recent MasterCamp that we have also launched in user experience design, right? And basically, to set the context, this is a course designed for people who are aspiring to get into UX design as a career, and it's a 6-month certification program with placement assistance as well. Okay, so I think a lot of you may have attended the master classes that we've done earlier as well, where we had firstly Mr. Manik Arora, who talked about why companies are investing so much in good user experience design, right? Post that, I think you guys must have attended the other session done by Antara as well, who told us about the different kind of roles that are within that fall within UX, and how one can aim or target based on the kind of skill sets that you have. Okay, and I'd also like to announce now today we have our guest, Mr. Suhail Gupta, who is going to take you more in depth towards how you can create a strong portfolio and how actually a portfolio is very important to actually crack into such roles within UI UX design. Okay, and if I give you a little background about Suhail, so he has over 8 years of experience within UX design, and currently he's working with Urban Company as a product designer. Okay, now apart from this, he's worked in fields of, let's say, electric mobility, into e-commerce delivery services, IoT, artificial intelligence, banking, hospitality, and SaaS as well. Okay, so that's a lot of experience that Suhail is coming from, and he's going to basically share about how you can also create a portfolio, which is what eventually for somebody to get into a good role, right? I think portfolio is absolutely very important, and especially in India, where a lot of students, they do work on a lot of interesting projects, but they're not able to sort of showcase that work in the right manner on their portfolios. Okay, so I'd like to quickly invite Suhail and take it over from here. And one more thing, guys, towards the end of the session, we will also be answering any questions or queries that you guys may have. So in the meanwhile, if any question arises, I would request you guys to put it in the Q&A section. Both me and Suhail will do our best to answer them in the right manner. Okay, so over to you, Suhail.
Thanks, basically. And again, thank you to Masters Union for making this possible. Cool. So I'll dive straight away into it, and I'll also just set some more additional context. There are always going to be people who will be around helping you, giving advice on what should be in a portfolio, what should not be in a portfolio. We'll just take it one step slightly behind it, but we'll also cover the basics as well, of course. And we'll talk mostly about what exactly is even the objective of a design portfolio. So I'd like to take some time on that piece. And then, of course, we'll get back into some of the basics of what a design portfolio does. Yeah, so Sharos introduced me well, but I'll just quickly go over some of the points. Currently working as a product designer at Urban Company. I've had about 7 years of experience in design, 5 years in a full-time role in all sorts of companies. And there are basically three sorts of roles which you can do in product design. And I've done all three of them. You can be a freelancer. So early in my career, I started out by basically freelancing, trying to build my own portfolio, which I could then use after college to get a full-time job. And then worked in very small scale startups as well, 50, 60 people, where I was the only product designer, so to speak. So did that for a couple of years. Then moved to Onething, who of course are co-sponsors, co-authors of the course that Sharos is referring to. Worked with them for 2.5 years, and then that became agency design context. And of course, that is where I worked with a variety of clients, Revolt, RBL Bank, Wibmo, a couple of lots of folks, honestly. I think he covered all the industries I've covered. That's the way I like to think of my experience as. And then, of course, eventually joined Urban Company as a product designer. And over here, I take care of design largely on the partner side of things. So how do the partners interact with their apps? Of course, as you can imagine, the partner ecosystem is always going to be a lot broader than whatever you see on the customer app. And my side hobbies are something like photography, videography. I also like music production, compose electronic music on the side, writing, reading, big tech buff and trekking. So as you can see from the picture as well. Cool. So I won't dive too much into myself beyond that point. Let's look at everyone. I think we can raise hands on Zoom, or basically let's just do a quick show of hands. How many of you on the call feel like you can make a great presentation? I'll just let a couple of hands come up. Okay, great. Honestly, this answer, to be on a good side, should be something like 100%. And I'll tell you why. If you look at what the profession eventually demands from you, design is presentation. There's a lot of design focuses on presentation. In some ways, the profession is that, like, what you're doing is you'll take a problem statement or a business statement or any product flow, let's say, and your job is to make it intuitive and delightful to users, which is essentially a presentation job. Not only that, in your day-to-day workflow, you will be doing a lot of presentations to your stakeholders, to developers, to business leaders, to if you're lucky, leadership, CEOs, managing directors. So it's all presentation, and I mean, the what you're presenting could change, but what a big part of your job is doing is it's always about presenting something. In fact, I like to think of this profession as 10% driven by your tools and how good you are at using them. 30% is about your knowledge of design and products and all of those things. And at least 60%, if not more, is entirely presentation skills. You can present, how do you present it to users, stakeholders, developers, anyone else who has to be presented it to? And keeping that in mind, you can also think of your portfolio as a presentation of its own. The objective of that portfolio is, I want to showcase myself and my work to whoever wants to consume it, right? In some ways, that is the presentation. It's like, here is me, here is my body of work. Either hire me, or I would like to be a peer, or learn from me, or whatever it is. Doesn't matter. The point is, you're presenting this. And in some ways, it's also not a presentation, because like right now, I control what you're consuming and how. The moment it's a portfolio, you have no control over its consumption. Like, anything in your portfolio can be consumed and in any order, versus a presentation, which is fairly linear and I control how you consume it. So in some ways, it's a presentation, and it's more of an uncontrolled presentation. You've just sent it to someone, and it's up to them how to consume it. It's up to them what do they derive from that portfolio. So to make sure you're aware of what's happening, you have to think of your portfolio as a design project itself. Like, I would say, and think of it in the same way you would think of a product or a website. It's, think about its UI and its UX. The UI has a clear objective, I have to appeal. The UX has a clear objective, I have to tell. And when you start looking at it as a design problem statement or a design project, your mindset when you create that portfolio will be way better. And keeping that in mind, let's just look at, like any product, who consumes your portfolio. Let's look at it, and let's try and think what these people are and what are they on your portfolio for. So I put them in 3 buckets. Bucket 1 is basically someone like an HR. These people would probably not have any intricate knowledge about design. They might probably not even be hiring just for design. They would be hiring for all sorts of roles, right? Design something could be one of them. So these people do not understand intricacies of what the role is. They don't understand, say, good design from bad design. They won't be able to assess your portfolio in that manner. What they're doing effectively is they're shortlisting you. Your portfolio goes through them. They might do some basic checks. And yeah, if they like what they're seeing without fully understanding it, you'll probably get ahead in the hiring pipeline. Another version of this could also be someone like, I don't know, let's say your mother or your family member or whoever ever accidentally stumbles on your portfolio, but really has no idea what's happening in the profession side of it. So these are just people who are checking you out, but like, let's not put them in your target audience. The other group is now these are people who may have either stumbled on your portfolio or were looking for something specific and found out that one of the things you're talking about, or the way it's designed, or something or the other, is something that they could maybe learn from. So these are effectively your peers. It might be that your portfolio has this case study on IoT, and this other designer from some other field or is basically trying to solve his own IoT related problems. He's just been given a project like that or something, and they want to absorb that. Like, let's look at who has already worked in IoT and let's see how did they go about it. And these are the people who will come to your portfolio basically for inspiration and learnings. So that's your second cohort. And of course, your third and most important cohort, you could say, for a portfolio, at least if you're trying to get hired, is the industry veteran, right? Now, these are people who, let's be honest, probably know more than you ever will. They are not here to learn, they're not here to shortlist. They're simply looking at your portfolio from the point of view of, okay, so what does this person even know? What, like, how good are they at what they're doing, or what they claim they can do, right? These are the people who will assess you basis everything. How it is designed, what are you trying to do, what did you work on, what your language is like. And in most cases, this is also what we do, but we look at these people and we basically, like, the portfolio invites questions which we would then want to ask you in interviews. Like, a lot of interviews, in fact, I've taken and conducted, are basically, okay, so tell me something, pick any case study from your portfolio and then let's deep dive into it. So these are the people who will then invite you to answer questions related to what you even presented to them in a portfolio. So yeah, these are three different skill levels of design, let's say, but there are three different TGs of your portfolio consumers, let's say. So yeah, once you know who is basically consuming this, now the question is, whom should your portfolio really appeal to? So the short answer is, and in my opinion, it always will be, it has to first of all appeal to you. Now, this is where I think even people who would have joined this call would be expecting more granular insights. Do this, show process, don't do this, don't do that. Like, you might want more of a checklist, but I can just tell you, there are people who want A and then there are people who want B. And sometimes A is not B. And this is where you just run into this rabbit hole of who you're trying to please. If you try to please everyone, you're not going to create a great portfolio in the first place. And, a couple of years ago, I wrote down an article on this also. It became one of my best articles, basically, which invited designers to do exactly this. Like, just make your portfolio how you want to make it, because there are three truths which you have to understand about your portfolio. The first part is it's subjective. So people they have different priorities. Now, I, for example, do not like whenever a portfolio shows competitive analysis and the competitive analysis is just sitting there with no context before or after. Like, it's sort of like we had to put it in our case study, so we did, but it gave us no insights. It gave us nothing to look at. Like, so, the question that always comes in my mind is, why are you showing me that? Granted, you would have probably looked at your competitors when you were designing this, but where's the narrative that fits in? Someone else, however, could have a polar opposite opinion as mine. So you don't know, right? Secondly, and this is actually, I'm sort of sad to say this, but it's true. Like, people are moody. Like, sometimes they might be in the mood for a quirky, funny portfolio. Sometimes they're just going to be like, I don't want any of this. Like, so of course, like, everyone's a lot more objective when it comes to hiring. So we do try our level best to not get our mood in the way, let's say, but it does affect perception, right? And that is where then you start realizing that there's an element of chance to it as well. But what you do control is, who do you want to impress? You don't want to impress everyone. You want to impress exactly the sort of people that you want to work with. So if you are that sort of person who likes the vibrant, quirky, very unique looking aesthetic, let's say, or make your portfolio look like that. And then the people that will be attracted to it are the sort of people who will be able to use that, versus having this overly bland portfolio, right? Where you as a person are way more vibrant and creative. Now, maybe someone would have told you that, okay, a bland portfolio works better because it appeals to a larger base, or I don't know. But if that's not in your nature, you're being dishonest. And in some ways, we can catch it in a portfolio that this is just not this person's aesthetic. They're just conforming to it. So always look at your portfolio as if it's designed to impress one person, which is you. If you're impressed by it, people who are like-minded will also be impressed by it. And these like-minded people are the ones whom you want to work with, whether as clients or whether as potential employers or anything, it doesn't matter. But these are the people you want to work with. Hence, design a portfolio that appeals to them. To do that, make sure it appeals to you. Of course, however, this doesn't mean that this webinar is rather pointless. It doesn't mean that, oh, a portfolio, anything is cool in a portfolio. Of course not. So this is where we'll try and cover some more basic ground rules. They're not checklists, but there are like some basic things which you can try and keep in mind. Again, only from the point of view of what is the point of a portfolio in the first place. So that point, again, we've had people like me get a lot of questions on what do you look for in a portfolio, or what is definitely going to get your attention and sort of get me ahead or anything like that. As a general pattern, I would say every great portfolio does three things well. The first most important thing is impress me. Like, if I have opened your portfolio, I want to be impressed. Doesn't matter with what, but I want to be impressed. Either it's because you are a funny copywriter, or because you have this great aesthetic sense, or you have a very refined minimal sense. It doesn't matter, just impress me. That's the first big objective. This is largely a visual problem. Second is showcase your work. So which is basically, tell me what you've done. Again, it doesn't matter in some ways what it is, right? We'll cover this more in context of a UI UX portfolio, but it's true for any portfolio. It's true for whether you are an interior designer or a graphic designer or whatever it is. Objective of a portfolio is to convey what you've done. And if your portfolio is failing to do that, then of course we have issues. And the third one, this is generally where I see people fail, is keep me engaged. Like, I don't want it to be a slog to go through your portfolio. I want it to naturally encourage me to consume more of your portfolio. Like, I would want to keep scrolling, see more, learn more about you. The more you can engage these people, the better your portfolio effectively is. These are the three ground rules for a what I would say is a great portfolio. If you can achieve all three of this, like, you have a great portfolio. We'll just quickly cover a bit of what these portfolios are. I'll also give you some examples of portfolios, whether in a good manner or in a bad manner. I don't want to dunk on any of these examples because these are real examples. So everyone has something or the other which they're doing well, or something that they're not doing well. That's why I won't show too many portfolios here as well. But yeah, of course, in some ways, we'll refer to some examples wherever we can. Great. So the first point is, like I said, impress me, which is largely a visual piece, right? To do that, I would highly recommend stay true to your aesthetic and show me that aesthetic. In that sense, let's just take at two quick examples. So this is a person who actually worked under me for a couple of years at one thing, and then, of course, went on to create his own portfolio. But you can see this immediately, like, there's an aesthetic. It doesn't matter whether it's something that will appeal to more people or not. It's an aesthetic, and it's a very clear aesthetic. It's in your face, right? This is the person, this is how I will, treat my web page, my design, everything along those lines. Of course, this guy went on to work with the developer as well to get this piece coded, and together they launched this portfolio website, and it actually went on to win an honorary award at awards also. So that's pretty cool, right? um, the polar opposite of this impression would be something who will just give me a Google Drive link. Now, doesn't matter what's inside it, this itself loses that impression. Some other examples that I can even think of is this person. Now, I personally don't like these websites which are largely basically a Notion page. I mean, yes, you can do certain things with it, but they're just so constrained in a way that, why would you lose a medium like a website? If you were creating a portfolio, use everything that you could get with a portfolio. The moment you use something like a Notion template, you're so constricted visually that not only does it look bland and generic, I cannot assess your visual skills looking at a Notion portfolio. Same thing would be true if you were to send me a Google Doc, right? You can format it to a certain extent, but beyond a point, I don't see any of your aesthetic coming out. Now, this person, of course, did their good job as well, right? They're putting in some quirky, funny copy and emojis like here and there. So they're keeping it somewhat happening. But yeah, like just that first impression is a big deal. You're in the business of first impressions, basically. And that's why the first impression matters. And if you fail to give me an aesthetic, if you're giving me this sort of generic look, or if you're starting with cliches, this is a big one. Would highly recommend all of you to not start with a cliche whenever possible, which is, underlining something, or hi, I am XXX product designer, is fairly like, I don't know how to say it. There's not much happening here. Like, same thing, I am this person, design investing. I've seen dozens, if not hundreds of portfolios like this, and after a point they lose their charm. And I would just basically look at this person and say, well, even if you have visual skills, I don't see them in your portfolio at all, and this is not what I would want, as a skill set for my visual use case. Of course, if someone's hiring for a not visual role, or if this person doesn't want to be hired for a visual role, then his portfolio is perfect, because he's removed all visual elements out of it, and he's just saying, look at my content and forget visuals. I'm not here to impress you, I'm here to get some work done. So he'll attract that kind of crowd. But a cred sort of company will not look at this portfolio and be impressed, because cred is extremely visual. So that's where, your impression matters. You're going to have an impression. It just, you can control what it is, but an impression is going to happen regardless. Second thing is, tell me what you did. Now, this is, of course, largely from case studies. I have seen some examples where people get a bit more creative also, rather than sticking to a case study format, let's say. But I would assume that, every project effectively is a case study of its own, which is what you did. That's the case study. And any good case study that I know is going to talk about three things for sure. Again, this is from a product or a UI UX design perspective, but in some ways, these hold true in any context, which is, first, give me a overview of what the context is, what the problem was, what was needed. So this is somewhere where I feel a lot of people eventually fail. They communicate something which is a problem, but they fail to explain what was required. Like, in the sense that, oh, this problem needed us to do XYZ. So try and communicate that as part of your context setting, that not only this is the worldview that we existed in and this is the problem we found out, this is what was also required to be done in order to solve this problem. And then, of course, that segues into your process. what were the intermediary steps, right? How were you getting around to dissect exact problem, refining it, or let's say you explored solutions and then you arrived at a certain solution. This is not the same as putting it in a process, which is, this was my problem statement, these are my personas, this is my information architecture, so my wireframes, this is my visual design. I know that looks like the standard process, but you have to keep the higher context in mind all the time, which is what was the problem. And if you did user personas, why did you do them in order to try and solve this problem? If you did information architecture, how was that helping you solve your problem, right? If you did UX, what all did you explore as solutions? If you finally created, your visuals, how do they solve that problem which you said existed? And then the third part, which is what your final output is in terms of the design itself, of course, what did you eventually create, but also in terms of this was what was achieved. Like I was instrumental in helping the company achieve this, like they, which can be anything, revenue, growth, lower drop off, impact, but like eventually you should tie it to, oh yes, this was achieved when I worked onto this. And something that some other people do also quite well, which is, why not tell where you failed, or what was left, or what is left and will be done at some point in the future, right? So I'll just go on to this person's example, because of course I took a bit of a dunk at him for not having a website, but when you look at his actual case study, you'll see that this person's largely kept a good format, right? The timeline is abstract, of course, it doesn't matter, but why are we doing this? So this person created this entire flow chart for me to follow, right? First of all, why are we doing this? Secondly, we identified the users. Third, we interviewed them. Fourth, we picked out who our TG is. From that, we built a solution for them, looked at all the use cases, created wireframes, UI, and then documented everything. Like the first slide itself has given me a good summary of what is otherwise a very long case study. But I'm not going to be off context anymore. And then this person goes on, of course, for a long while, right? But talks a lot about every piece of it and keeps a certain aesthetic going as well for a while. And then you can keep looking at everything. Of course, there are some things which aren't great here as well. We'll get to them in some future slides. But then you go through it all the way down, and then this person's also put in things which are insights, basically. Why not? Like, if the objective of a portfolio is to tell me what you are at the end of a case study, why not talk about how this project helped you grow? Like, these were learnings from my project, which is a great thing to have. So yeah, that's the second piece, which is actually tell me what you've done. And after that, we'll just cover the third thing, which is keep me engaged. This is where I always see case studies fall, because the first two are fairly understood and they're even intuitive to people, but to keep them engaged is a different story. The biggest pitfall that I see is people start documenting what happened. It's never as engaging as actually giving you a story. So an example of this documentation is, let me just find the correct example here. I think it was this one. So yeah, this person's gone into, taken into Medium, but this is the context. This was the problem, the constraints. Let's look at what we did and why we did. Step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4. Why was this the correct solution? Something, something, something. It's not strictly a bad example, right? But why document what you were doing? Just give me a fun narrative whenever you can. Put it as a story. And if you look at any good storytelling sort of example, this is always what they do. They figure out ways to keep you engaged. They'll use hooks hooks is a great way to sort of tell, like, oh, this is what's about to happen, and but then this happened, and then we pivoted, we ran something. Hooks also do like a quick summary of something in the beginning, which is like, want to know how we solved XYZ? You go on. Use exaggeration. I honestly don't have an issue with anyone exaggerating something just for the fun of it. Add delight, weird quirky bits in the middle of a case study keeps things engaging, keeps you reading. And the best part about some of these, when they're keeping you engaged, is the manner in which you keep me engaged, the little snippets you keep adding in the middle of your case study. They'll tell me things about you. They'll tell me, oh, this is what it's like when this person's working, right? This is how they behave. This is their personality. This is how they approach a problem or a solution. It tells me things about you, which otherwise I wouldn't get to know. So these would be the three pillars, which is, we'll just quickly revise them. Impress me, which is largely a visual piece, especially if you're approaching roles for visual design or UI design, highly important. Second is showcase your work, and showcase it in a manner that is relevant in the problem solution context. I mean, in the end, design is problem solving. So if your portfolio is just this endless start to end of, I created this, then this, then this, then this, you might as well put it like on a Behance. Like, the more words, the better. And third would be keep me engaged. Use your personality, or use hooks, or just good storytelling, whatever is required to make sure I'm consuming case study after case study. There are, of course, there can be a lot of things which someone can say, do these things. They tend to contradict. But what I've seen, talking to my own manager, my previous bosses, my previous peers, everyone, people are fairly clear on what they don't like in a portfolio. So I would probably encourage you to avoid these things as far as possible. They sometimes just do not leave a good impression, and that impression tends to stick very strongly. So the first two are not that big a deal. They're not that offensive either. They're like, a lot of times case studies get very ambiguous in terms of, like, so what were you doing? It invite, a lot of case studies invite that question, which is, especially when you start talking only about what is in the product. Like, the product has this workflow, we had this problem, this was what business wanted, so we created these screens, something, right? The more you do this, the more vague it gets. That, okay, so what was your contribution to this? Because especially when you're talking about product problems, everyone in product realizes that it's not a one person job, or if it is a one person job, I would highly recommend you to brag about it, that I was the only person who came up with the problem, refined it, solved it, implemented it, and owns the success of, or the impact of that problem, right? If that is the case, own it. Otherwise, make it fairly clear where you were contributing and where someone else did the job. In some cases, in my case studies, I've just written very clearly, like, this person owned this person owned that person owned that, and of course whatever remains was me. Second is related to the first, largely because it creates the same problem. The case study just starts talking about, if you can take a couple of examples, I think from some of the portfolios here as well. No, not this one. Yeah. So this is a great example, because the problem statement is effectively a generic business problem statement. The challenge is a business problem statement. This person highlights their role. Then beyond that, everything, again, where is the person, right? We have created this, this is the page, this is the product. The individual contribution is somewhat missing. And in some places, this person obviously captured them as well, which was, like, I sketched a couple of these things, right? And then this person immediately stopped using I for everything else. That also comes off as a sort of a question, that, so you did the sketching, and then what happened to the rest of it? Did someone else do that, or did a team do this, or were you in charge of the team? etc. Make it very clear what your contribution was at all points, and don't document what the product is. Just document, like I told you, problem and solution. Third is failing to give closure. This is sometimes happens in articles. I've seen it just a person thing. Some people just tend to talk about a lot of things and then not really tell what happened beyond that point. So basically you raised problems and then you didn't even explain to me how they were solved. So for example, somewhere in a case study, you would have written that, oh, customer trust was low, or, we needed to establish trust with our customers. And then that point just never comes up again in anything. So that's basically not giving closure, which is, if you identified that as a problem, what happened to it down the line? Like, how did you solve it in your designs? And that I've seen again happens basically when you just put in an entire screenshot and let someone else take, those problems in mind and look at them and, oh, okay, so he put in this piece to solve the trust problem, rather than you pointing it out, if you even solved it, let's say, right? So to fail to give closure is another big problem which I see. You raise problems or you talk about things earlier in your article or your case study, which then go nowhere, or pivot entirely, or something like that. I just don't get closure on, so what happened with all of these things eventually. Fourth and fifth is always something which I've seen leaves a bad taste in any recruiter's mouth, especially whenever it goes to a design director or someone of that level. Bragging is, there are two kinds of bragging. There's the soft bragging, which is, I did this, I did that, I did that. Sometimes I've also seen it taken a step further, which almost becomes either arrogant or demeaning, in the sense of, it rarely happens, of course, but the way it happens is generally from a soft context. It's like if you redesigned Zomato entirely, and you're just sort of, in your case study, you're talking about it as if, nobody at Zomato thought of these brilliant things which I thought of, and therefore I've solved them. Like, that is generally something which we in the industry definitely look at as being arrogant, because what you're trying to effectively say is that I, in a few days, have solved problems that you as an entire team have failed to do in years. And questions being raised on such level is like, why does Zomato have food delivery or whatever? That is generally something which I see happens in case studies. You subconsciously being very arrogant, or sometimes you're just being directly arrogant. You're trying to be funny, but it comes off as arrogant. uh, Big red flag. Make sure that never happens in your portfolio. Fifth, which personally annoys me the most, even more than being arrogant, because arrogance I can tolerate. It's like, if you're skilled, you're allowed a certain level of hubris. Teasing, or especially locking your portfolio, or putting something like, oh, coming soon, no more, and then of course it leads you nowhere. Never a fan of it. So there's an example of that happening here. This person, right? Fairly clean case study for a while, and then I go through it. Okay, so this person basically has 3 case studies, and now what's going to happen? You want to view this one? Oh, it's password locked. Okay, great. How do I even put this? This case study above it, password locked. It just leaves a bad taste in your mouth. You had 3 case studies and 2 of them are locked. And what is there to lock in Christmas stamps? Just show it, right? It feels dishonest. That's the point. And if that feeling comes across, like, I would recommend, just don't lock anything. Anything is public consumption, or don't put it in your portfolio. If you're not proud of it, don't put it in your portfolio. If it's not finished, don't put it in your portfolio. If, like, you feel the need to just put in one piece, and you really don't want to show more, hence it's locked. You're just giving someone a teaser of, this is what the stamps were which I created, but there's not really much more to it, hence I'm locking it. So doesn't matter, just put that piece and say, this is what I created, and then the case study ends there, and I know, okay, great, maybe there's no narrative around it. But don't do this. This is what I would personally highly discourage everyone from doing. Don't lock your portfolios. It's just not fun. And yeah, like, just put whatever you're proud of in your portfolio. Cool. Last point, which I'd like to just quickly highlight, is you guys should just, of course, keep in mind that we're not unaware of the problems that you guys face, right? We've probably all been there, done that. Like I've personally been at that stage where I needed to create a portfolio without having experience, or then I needed to create a portfolio to get a better job. And um, you have work which you're not proud of, so you do things to hide them. You leave stories incomplete, whatever it is. We're aware. The good part is, most of your recruitment is really going to happen with designers, so no one's going to be unaware of what portfolio issues are. The biggest thing that people are always concerned about in terms of a portfolio is, oh, my portfolio is very old, like I created this a year or 2 years ago, and then they don't want to share it because they're like, I don't like it that much, I haven't had the time to create a new portfolio, and then my old portfolio doesn't really reflect my current skill set. I'm way better than what that makes it look like. It's okay. The point is, we're also in those positions. I personally don't, I didn't even renew my portfolio website right now because I'm like, what's the point? At this point, there's no point, right? But we all get into those problems, and you don't have to worry too much about your portfolio from the point of view of how will it be perceived. You should, however, have 100% control on how does it impress and what content does it have. Again, going back to the first point, if it's on your portfolio, it can be consumed. You don't control the order. I would say don't put 50 case studies, put 5 case studies which you're really proud of, and forget about the rest. Even in those 5 case studies, if you only have, say, 2 things you're proud of, put those 2 things, and it's okay if you spend 6 months working on this other piece that didn't go live or was not released, or then changed entirely. In no way does that compromise your design skill. And we are perfectly aware of these problems. We know that a lot of people will design things that might never see the light of day, or when they see the light of day, they're just terrible when you see them in production. I've designed apps which are like that, right? So you don't need to hide any of those things. Be very honest with us, with yourself. Create something you like. Talk about what you did, what you liked to do, and just let everyone else clean it up beyond that point. So yep, that's the entirety of it. Let's just open this to some quick question and answers.
Okay, so thank you so much. I think that was a really insightful session for all of you, and I hope a lot of you have taken up some points. I mean, I know I have definitely. Okay, so now we'll proceed to the questions. There already are a few questions as well, so we'll start from the beginning. So the first question is from Mega, who says, "How and where can I learn to make this kind of portfolio?"
I'm not sure in what context. I think she would have referred to the first portfolio which I had showcased.
Mhm.
Uh,
The correct the what do you call it? Dynamic one.
yes, that one. So, I mean, I would say best place to learn that is the same place you will learn product design itself, which is um, either on the job or as part of a masterclass. So, because effectively it's a portfolio, right? But it's still a website. What you need to know is how to design a good website.
Okay, so I think that question is answered. Now let's get to a question where Shreya is asking that I'm a newbie and studying UX from scratch online. How does one make a portfolio of only case studies, or should one work on freelance projects before sending it out to companies for employment? How would you say the timeline would be like?
Yeah, it's a fair question. Basically, portfolio for new people, right? So
Freshers. Mhm.
yeah, now I there's obviously a problem here. You have to be honest about the fact that you don't have a body of work to show because you have not been able to basically do anything at that point, right? What I've seen people do is they do case studies, and actually that doesn't even matter. You have to, first of all, when you think of it from the point of view of what is the point of that portfolio, the point of that portfolio at that point is to get you hired. Someone who's hiring you is looking for, at that point, 2 things. They know they have to mentor you. They know you don't have industry experience. You can't hide it, right? So the 2 things that you can use to impress them is, firstly, I'm skilled. So your portfolio should not invite questions of are you skilled or not. Your skill is in visuals, your skill might be in animations, your skills might be in your problem solving mentality, your thinking. that skill has to shine through visual, UX, whatever. And that skill can shine through only, you would say, by case studies. So in which case, again, I would say go ahead with case studies, but then don't, like I said, right, don't be arrogant enough to claim that, oh, here's an entire redesign of Paytm. I would highly recommend picking individual flows, refining them, pointing them out that, hey, when you on Paytm, you go from this flow to that flow, maybe we could do something like this. Places where you as a newbie can actually lend in experience, which an industry veteran might have turned blind to. That's the best part about joining a new company, or joining as a fresher, which is, you of course will gain experience, but what your immediate superior, or anyone else in the design team gains from you is a fresh perspective. The fresh perspective is the best part, which is, oh, we never thought of this, because we were so ingrained in business problems that, yeah, like we could just do it like that, right? Case studies like that work very well. The route I went with personally was, I freelanced. And of course, this was back in 2016, 2017, when UX was not that big a thing. So it was a lot harder to freelance for it also in some ways. Now, however, I feel like you can just freelance rather easily. Like, a lot of people are looking for more immediate short-term needs of, like, I just need a website. I just need this. I just need that. So if you can freelance and build a body of work for, say, a year or so, that's also great, right? Because it not only gives you that sort of disclaimer that, oh, I have some real world experience, I'm not a person who needs absolute guidance on day one. You can also use that in place of case studies, right, to make sure you communicate those skills, that, look, I approach this problem in this way, and here's my skill being shown to you, right? I can create good designs, and I can think well in problems. And in a lot of companies, that's good enough to get you ahead, at least into the interview round, which is your goal anyway. The rest, of course, is how to crack an interview, which is a different problem.
Okay, all right. So I think that question was answered in a very nice way, Shreya. I hope that has helped you. Now, there's a question that's on a similar line, which says, should a fresher first create a dribble Behance portfolio or create a personal portfolio site?
I'm not a fan of dribble Behance. Again, personal taste, right? So I don't want to influence anyone with that. Dribble and Behance, in my opinion, are fairly very limiting, in fact. So it depends on what you're trying to crack as well. Dribble, I would say, definitely not for product design, because product design is problem solving and thought, which dribble just creates a snap off, and it's like, look, I can create a pretty design. So for visual design, maybe. For UI, UX, and product, probably not. Don't go the dribble route unless you're an illustrator or a content designer or a motion designer. In that case, your dribble body of work is fantastic, because you can create individual shots. Behance is more ambiguous, but in some ways, what you're doing in Behance is you're just trying to hack your way into making it look like a website anyway. You'll create these series of images, one below the other. Some of them will be largely text, some of them will be, it's like trying to create it in a PDF or a Behance, same thing. You're just creating basically a presentation, slide by slide by slide, one below the other. So in those cases, I would say, especially if you go around to buying a domain, and then, I mean, some of the tools are not even that expensive, right? You can go to something like Squarespace, which is the most expensive tool I know. And even that, with the domain cost, would be something like 10, 15,000 a year. So it sort of conveys to us that, yeah, this person's invested, so that gives it a better impression than using a free tool like a Notion or a Behance. But if you feel like even on Behance you can pull off that impression, like, go ahead. I wouldn't stop anyone from that. My personal preference would be, if you're an illustrator or graphic designer, dribble's great. If you're someone who's like into branding and that sort of stuff, Behance is great, because that's just the right place for it. Or if you create fonts, again, Behance is amazing for that. But for everything else, I'd probably encourage stick to websites.
Okay, all right. So a lot of questions have been in the same area. Even RJ has asked, Behance is good for portfolio. The second question is from Mahesh, which platform one should build the portfolio on. So I think all of these have been answered
Yeah.
here. Now, moving to the next question, which is from Nitika, who says, how do we share our research and design on a public platform before it's actually live?
In most cases, I don't think you can, largely because that would most likely violate some company policy. There are scenarios though in where I would say it has to come to some conclusion. The conclusion can also be that the entire project was abandoned or the startup itself shut down, right? Whatever. In that case, it doesn't matter. Put it live, whatever it is. If it is something which you know is being developed, would probably recommend you to not do that, not take it live, or in most cases, there are even NDAs or things like that specifically designed to solve that problem that you don't want anyone else. Companies can of course be a bit like, so I want to say anal basically, but I can't think of another word. But they can just be like, oh, our product's not live, don't tell anyone, blah blah blah. So it's generally not a safe option to do it unless it's very clear that it's abandoned, and then you can, then it's your work which is basically existing, so do that.
So I think even Shweta has asked the same thing, that we sign a non-disclosure agreement for certain clients. So in these situations, the work can't be put open in public domain. So I think that this also has been answered, Shweta. So I would say that if the startup is shut, then it's fine, right? But as long as your company is given you consent for it, I think that should be okay.
I'll add one more point to that also, because this NDA related problem comes a lot, especially whenever I bring up the point of projects being locked. The catch there is, so first of all, especially if you're either freelancing or in an agency or any of those sort of setups, would highly recommend you to make sure your NDA expires. I put that in my clause and very clearly that it's either 3 months or when the product goes live, like whatever comes last. But like, I'm just not going to sign up for an infinite NDA, right? Which is I give you work and it stays secret forever. I mean, I guess you could take projects like that if you were working like for the CIA or something, but with an edtech startup, like what do they have after 6 months, which is so confidential, especially if the product's live or if whatever they were making is live. So in most cases, I would say just make sure you don't tunnel yourself into that NDA in the first place. And then that just leaves one group, which is the employer themselves have locked you in on an NDA, right? In some cases, this actually happens and it's valid. Like, for example, I have this friend who works in a cybersecurity firm. Of course, his work is under NDA. Like, it's a no brainer. In which case, just respect that and be honest about the fact that, I work at this place and I've created stuff for them, but I can't show it to anyone. Which would then bring the question of why even suggest that this work exists. Just don't talk about it. Like, respect it or don't respect it. That's the way I would say it. Yeah, but that would be the NDA side of problems.
Okay, all right, fair enough. So I think that's the right way to do it, right? Don't try to get into that situation in the first place.
Especially if you're freelancing, it's very easy to control because you set the contract, and I always make sure I have that in my contract. I'm not going to sign to an infinite NDA. At some point, I will show my work purely for. In fact, a lot of NDAs people confuse with sort of non-competes. So non-compete is entirely different. Non-compete is you can't sell this design to someone else, but that's an entirely different thing from showing it as part of public recognition. So make sure that boundary is very clear in your head and in the head of whoever's signing that contract with you. And yeah.
Okay, all right, great. Now, next is from Kavana. So she's also asking a similar question. Can you share clients' work in the portfolio? So this is, I think, what Suhail has also been discussing right now, Kavana. So I think that question has been answered. Okay, so one question I think that would be relevant for you, Suhail, is that how do you move from UX to product design?
Right. I honestly feel like that boundary is still very hazy. I can see a boundary, but firstly, because the word is just thrown around like for no reason. Secondly, is a lot of people who are in the industry themselves are not very clear on where does one begin and one ends. So the distinction that I have created right now in my head between UI, UX design and product design is, let's think of two companies. One is Adidas and one is Swiggy. Now, if you're a UI UX designer for Adidas, it's fairly clear you're not working on that product. The product is shoe or clothing or whatever, right? You are in Adidas effectively as a UI UX designer. What you're doing is there would be an interface layer, let's say the Nike app, the Nike website, for example, right? Or Adidas app, Adidas website. This is what you're in charge of. You're in charge of that front end side of the problem, which is how does this system interact with the customer. However, when you move into something like Swiggy, the app is the product. So UI, UX, and product are extremely blurred in those places. And in fact, in some ways, it's like you could say that I'm working on the UX, which is basically whatever the product wants, say, 1 day shipping. I'm trying to make it intuitive to my customers that this is possible, by some method or other. I'll highlight it when they're checking out or whatever it is. These are UI UX problems, but at some point you will be pulled in to literally contribute to the product itself. So right now, the way I work at Urban Company, I know I'm a product designer primarily because I dictate how the product itself works. How does Urban Company, take one customer and give him a partner? This is an entire backend called matchmaking, which only caters to this problem. And a lot of it has nothing to do with the front end. There's no front end here. The front end is, oh, you don't have a partner, you have a partner. The entire problem exists in the back end, right? And if you have anything to do or anything to say in that, how does this matchmaking happens? How does the product work? If you have say into that, that is when you transcend from a UI UX designer to a product designer. And personally, I can tell it's a very hard transition because you suddenly realize that you're no longer responsible for making things intuitive to a customer or a partner. Now your problem is the product itself. How can the product itself be intuitive rather than just the interface being? So that's where I look at the boundary basically. And of course it's a hazy boundary, but I think it at some point it's very clear.
Okay, all right. I think that's very interesting. Now, there's one question also from Shrey, which is that is there any ideal number of case studies that I should put in a portfolio for a fresher? Or what is the ideal number according to you?
For a fresher, okay, that's very specific. I would say, again, I look at case studies as the point is not to tell everything you've done. The point is to tell me what's the best you can do. The point of a portfolio is that, right? Tell me the best you can do. So too many case studies is just sort of like it invites indecision on my part, first of all, if I am looking at your portfolio. Like, where do I even start? It means on your end, not all of it is your best work. Some of it is mediocre work. Some of it might not have been done at all, right? But what you're doing is you're inviting someone to consume all of it. And I, from where I'm sitting, I can consume anything. I like that name, or I felt like looking at your edtech experience. Turns out that was the least uh, good portfolio item you have. So why give them content that isn't your best work? So the ideal number, irrespective of whether you're a fresher or not, I would say probably don't cross 6 or 7. 5, in fact, is a good number. I'm still happy with 5. There is one portfolio actually, if I'm still screen sharing. Yeah. So I'll just share you this guy's portfolio. It's basically like my idol. And this guy has 10 things or something like that on his website. And only in his case do I feel it's justified, because those 10 things are something like, oh, this is my tool for portfolios. Like, I created a tool where someone can create a portfolio. That's project one. And he's the CEO and founder of it. Second, I created something for NASA, right? Third, I created this software. Okay, fine, maybe slightly less compared to the other ones. Fourth, I created a movie poster. Fifth, work for NASA again. Sixth, um, created this entire app for meditation. Fourth, a guideline for New York City. Like, eighth, oh, by the way, I was also director at Spotify. Ninth, 10th, right? This guy deserves to talk about 10 things. Like, oh my God, all of them are amazing, right? So someone like him, yeah, go on, dude, brag. For the rest of us, I would probably say like 5 or 6 of our best work is more than good enough.
Okay, great. So I think that is answers question. That question is answered. Now there's one question from Parki Malhotra. And she says that I have been studying UX for over 2 years now, and I have worked as a UX designer as well for over a year. I have worked with a startup and a team at an MNC as well, and I want to further improve my research skills. So, also, I struggle with designing a website or a responsive website. So, how can I improve if I want to go for research specific roles within UX?
I would say it would be the same as trying to crack the role itself, which is you want to, like, a portfolio is a great tool for it, right? Start putting more case studies, talk more about research, introduce yourself as a researcher. Like, I've done that a lot of times. I mean, actually, I have not done that, but I know people who've done that. Like, they would basically call themselves as either I'm a UX researcher, or they would say I'm a UX designer and also interested in research or something like that. So you're making it fairly clear over time that this is the place I specialize in. And irrespective of where you're working right now, your portfolio is basically attracting your next employer, let's say, right? So that physical boundary rarely matters. Like, I think someone's also had a question of how do I become a web developer or this or that. Your current role is not critical to what your next role will be. Your portfolio is forward looking. It invites a certain crowd, right? So you can control what that crowd is by making sure you put more research stuff in it. Or if you want to attract product design jobs, you put more product design, product thinking into it. You want to attract, a role of a visual designer at Cred, make like this super jazzy, fancy interaction or something like that, and they'll notice because they have it all over their app, right? So use the portfolio as a tool itself to pivot into it. That is what I would suggest you to do. And of course, wherever possible, find opportunities to research. I wouldn't say don't work well in whatever you're working on already. Of course, do your job well, of course, but then have conversations with your manager or whoever you can that, hey, can you just like give me more research related tasks? Maybe it'll be 30% in the beginning, might increase to 50%. Even if it doesn't, over time, you'll have that body of work of research, which you can then use for, later in your life.
Okay, all right, Paki. So I think that question has been answered. Now, Pragati is asking slightly a different question. So she says, I'm a software engineer and currently pursuing industrial design, but I'm a fresher for UI UX. And I want to apply for internships and jobs. So is it okay to include my experience as a software engineer, to get into UX?
I'm a bit confused. So you said this person's a software engineer
Software engineer
pursuing.
currently pursuing industrial design, but wants to get into UX. So he's asking that should I share my experience as a software engineer? Will that make it wrong for me?
So there are three different professions actually. Pursuing industrial design. Industrial design and UX are different professions as far as I'm aware. So not sure how that's coming into the picture. Again, however, I would say your experience as a software engineer is actually not
Relevant.
no, actually it's not about relevance. It's about, in some ways you can use that to communicate that, oh, by the way, I not only can I design, I also know how it actually runs in code, which is a great skill. Of course, it's not the skill you're being hired for on paper, but you can use that as an avenue to say, I'm aware of how code works and I want to be onto the design side of it. Of course, the rest of it remains same. You want to build a design body of work and things the same as we talked about in for all the other pieces in the portfolio. You want all of that only to happen. Create a design body of work and everything, or talk to your current employers, see if they let you design and just code some of those things on your own. The pivot again is not hard, and in your case I would probably mention something like software engineer turned product designer, which just gives you actually more street cred in the end, because designers who know code is already quite appreciated. So if a developer turns into a designer and has the right visual aesthetic for it and everything, like, fantastic. Like,
It's a really good combination. Agreed.
yeah, exactly.
Okay, so there's one interesting question from Tejas Joshi who's saying that with traditional portfolio, does having a video portfolio help you stand out? And if you're making a video portfolio, how long should the length be?
Video portfolios are again great for strictly a visual sense. I don't really see any problem solving being explained on a video. So, the video portfolios would work well if you're a motion designer. or a visual designer who also dabbles into motion. Otherwise, it's a skill set that in most companies relay is always separate. So if you're looking especially to be hired into UI, UX or product, I wouldn't necessarily look at a video portfolio, primarily for the reason that what I'm looking at as UX or product is, can you make something intuitive? Can you solve the problems that business has? All the sort of things. Video skills don't really tie into any of this. Where they do tie into is motion and sometimes in UI. Even then, whether you can code a fancy interaction is more important than can you just create a mock of it, in most cases.
Okay, great. So there's one question from Dheeraj who's saying, I'm a web developer and I want to learn UI UX design. How can I start or how should I start?
I'm trying really hard not to pitch the course here every time. But
Yeah, so I will,
um,
by the way, guys, towards the end, once Suhail, has gone, if you guys want to know about the course as well, we can have a quick chat on that as well. Yeah.
yeah, but I would say, 5 years ago, this was a harder problem because there were no courses. There was no real formal education. Whatever formal education was, it was sort of teaching you concepts 10, 15 years old, not relevant at all today. Apps themselves are like what, 20, 15 years old. iPhone came out in 2007, App Store came out in 2008. So basically, apps are like 14, 15 years old. So it's really hard to find educational content. I can tell you informally what I use the most is a combination of Medium, which has this library of almost free insights from actual designers who are working in this profession, right? So you can learn straight from them. There are a lot of people who have even put out free courses, right? Like 2 week, 3 week, 6 week free courses, basics of the tool, things like that. Everything exists. Like the question is, you can just find it. Paying for it would make it somewhat simpler in some cases, either as a course, online course, web course, physical course, whatever. But yeah, like you would learn the way everyone eventually learns, which is a combination of on the job plus whatever people who are already doing that job have to say about it. And the place that they tend to say about it the most right now is Medium. Go for one of those places.
All right. Okay, so there's one more question from Arul who's saying, what is the difference between UI, visual, and product design?
Okay, so I think product I fairly covered. UI and visual is actually quite interrelated depending on where you're working. So I've seen visual designer is actually an open job role or like a job role basically in sort of MNC sort of scenarios. UI designer is also relatively interchangeable with that problem. So again, like I told you, the boundary is something like purely visual, which would be a visual designer. And especially in like the MNC companies where this happens. Now, what happens is they have entire teams, and there's a person who only works on wireframes and a person who only works on research, right? And then the wireframes come to you. You're responsible for basically creating visuals out of them. And then sometimes there's even a separate interaction motion designer. So you might literally have that job. So visual designer, strictly speaking, is that entirely. Like I don't touch the UX at all. I'm provided it and I just put a color, font vagera, that sort of layer on top of it. So it's only a small step up from graphic design in some ways. UI designer starts getting a bit more into the entire interface, which is some parts of the animation, parts of the logic, parts of the process, code. A lot of times UI designers need to know design systems and how to hand it off to a front end, things like that. UX, especially when you club it with UI, then means I'm basically handling the entire interface. So why is it structured the way it is? The copy, the interface, visuals, the animation, the motion, everything basically I'll start owning as part of UI UX and add product onto it. That means I'll just start owning entire branches of the product. Like how does the product even work? Of which a subset is what does the interface look like?
All right, great. So I think what we also understand here is that user experience would be a more broader perspective, whereas UI is only the visual part of it, designing the interaction bit and so on.
Yes. However, there's always fun debates on if something jingles, like if there's a sound, is that UI or UX? Things like that keep happening, right? But
I would say UX. I don't know. What
I
is the
would put
right?
it I would put it in the UX bucket, UI bucket, mainly because
Okay.
it's still an interface, right? The interface is now sound rather than
Mm-hmm.
visual.
And
So
vibration as well. You have the haptic feedback.
haptic feedback counts into it, right? So it becomes a bit of a slippery slope. At what point do you draw that boundary? But I mean, someone like in my company explained it as the decision of when to do the haptic feedback is the UX. The
Okay.
decision
Mm-hmm.
of how it
Yes.
actually works is the UI, right? So
UI, correct, correct. Yeah, so like positive reinforcements, right? Like when we double tap on Instagram, it gives us that vibration. So I
right.
think so I think you've explained it very rightly there.
Yeah. So that's the UX principle, which is I need to give positive reinforcement. So
Hmm.
that's the UX thought. The interface is how do I do it? I could do it
How
only
strong the vibration should be, how long it should be for.
as a
So,
larger decision. Like I could do it only visually, or I could do it visually and give a jingle and do a vibration. Right.
mhm.
So that's the interface layer of it. But that's why UI UX is generally just clubbed because it's very hard to separate the two.
Okay, all right. So I think this was a very insightful session for all of us, but unfortunately, I think we are sort of now running out of time. So Suhail, if you would like to go, that's fine. And if in guys you have any other questions, anything else, you can share them over here. I'll be answering them as well.
Cool.
So
Okay.
all right.
Um,
So thank you so much, Suhail, once again. And I think this was a great session, guys. If you have any questions you'd want to ask also quickly, you can put that. I think Suhail would be here for another 1 minute or so. Ask how can they apply for UC?
there's a website design.urbancompany.com. Uh, Feel free to visit it, apply it. Cool. So then I'll basically head.
All right. Thank you, Suhail. Until next time.
Yes. Thank you, Charles.
Thank
Thanks,
you. Have a
everyone.
good evening.